The park encounter. The late afternoon sun cast warm, golden rays across Cedar Park, illuminating the trails and playgrounds bustling with families, joggers, and children. Maya Collins, a 13-year-old girl with a quiet yet curious nature, took in the familiar sights with a smile. It was her favorite place, and for good reason. Her father, Captain Elijah Collins, often patrolled here, bringing a sense of security and pride to her and everyone else who visited. She loved the idea of surprising him while he was on duty. It wasn't just a chance to spend time with him. It was a reminder of his important role in the community. Maya had promised her mom she wouldn't wander too far, but as she circled the park for the second time without seeing him, she began to grow impatient. Maybe he's over by the picnic area, she thought, shifting her backpack on her shoulder and quickening her pace. The park echoed with laughter, the happy shouts of kids on swings, and the smell of fresh-cut grass. As she scanned the area, her gaze settled on a figure in a police uniform near the edge of the lake. Her heart skipped, but as she drew closer, her excitement turned to confusion. It wasn't her father. It was Officer Nolan Tate, one of her father's younger subordinates. She vaguely remembered meeting him once at a precinct event, and while he had been polite, something about him felt a bit unsettling. Still, she figured it was best to be polite. Taking a deep breath, she offered a small smile and started to turn away. "Maya, right?" Officer Tate called, his voice carrying a slightly mocking tone. He approached her with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Out here all alone? Daddy's little girl out looking for some adventure?" Caught off guard, Maya hesitated. Hi, Officer Tate," she managed. "I was just looking for my dad. Have you seen him around?" His smile grew wider, and he let out a low chuckle. "Oh, I think he's probably a bit busy right now, don't you?" He glanced around, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Running around here without a care. You must think you're really special, don't you?" Maya's heart began to beat faster. She didn't like the way he looked at her, or the edge in his voice. I'm just here to see my dad," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh, I know," he sneered, stepping closer. "All kids think they're untouchable when they have a big, tough daddy around. But let me tell you, sometimes you need a little reminder that you're just another kid." Maya took a step back, her unease growing. She couldn't understand why he was acting this way. She had never met an officer who was anything but kind and respectful. Her father was always talking about the importance of being a role model, treating everyone with respect, especially children. But Officer Tate's demeanor was anything but kind. It was as if he took pleasure in her discomfort. "Don't look so scared," he continued, feigning a friendly tone. "I just thought you might want to try something new. Ever had a taste of the real world, Maya? Or does Daddy keep you in a bubble?" Maya frowned, wanting to leave, but a strange kind of fear kept her rooted. I don't know what you mean." With a swift motion, he pulled a small glass bottle from his pocket and held it up in front of her. "Come on, just one sip. It's nothing dangerous. Don't be such a goody two-shoes." Her face went pale as she realized he was offering her alcohol. She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No, thank you." His face twisted in irritation, and his friendly facade melted away. "You think you're too good to accept a simple offer, huh? You're just like the others, spoiled, sheltered, clueless." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She took another step back, glancing around in the hope that someone would notice. But the path was empty, and she was painfully aware of how far she was from the main park area. "Please, I just want to go find my dad," she stammered, trying to keep her voice steady. He leaned in closer, his voice a low, dangerous murmur. "I think you need to learn that Daddy's badge doesn't make you untouchable." Before she could react, he grabbed her wrist, his grip cold and unyielding. Maya's heart hammered in her chest as she struggled, trying to pull free. She felt the rough glass of the bottle press against her lips, the acrid smell of alcohol overwhelming her senses. "Open up," he sneered, forcing her closer. She shook her head desperately, tears forming in her eyes as she fought against him. Her mind was a blur of panic and disbelief. This was supposed to be a safe place, the place where her father kept everyone protected. How could this be happening? "Let go," she cried, but her voice came out choked, weak against the strength of his grip. Then, like a beacon in the darkness, she heard a voice that filled her with a sense of relief she couldn't describe. Maya. She looked up to see her father sprinting toward them, his face twisted in fury and horror. In that moment, Officer Tate's hold slackened just enough for her to pull away, stumbling back as her father reached them. Captain Collins, a man known for his calm demeanor and dedication to justice, was seething. He put himself between Maya and Tate, his stance protective, his gaze hard and unyielding. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice laced with controlled rage. "This is my daughter." Tate stepped back, his confident smirk faltering as he stammered. I was just trying to have a little fun. You know, just messing around. Kids need a little toughening up sometimes." Elijah's jaw tightened, his voice like steel. "That's your idea of fun? Intimidating a child? Forcing alcohol on her? You're nothing but a bully, Tate." Maya's father glanced at her, his gaze softening with concern. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, drawing her close. She clung to him, her hands shaking, her mind still reeling from the encounter. Elijah turned back to Tate, his voice steady but filled with unmistakable authority. "You're done here, Tate. I don't care who you are or what excuses you make. Harassing my daughter, harassing any child, is unforgivable." Tate's face paled, his defiance crumbling. He tried to offer a weak smile. "Captain, come on. We're on the same team, right?" "Not anymore," Elijah replied coldly, signaling for a nearby officer. "Officer Diaz, escort Officer Tate out of here. I'll be filing a full report and making sure he faces the consequences." Maya watched as Tate was led away, his bravado replaced by visible dread. Her father kept a steady hand on her shoulder, his presence a comforting anchor in the aftermath of fear. She wanted to say something, but all she could manage was a shaky, "Thank you, Dad." Elijah looked down at her, his expression softening. "You don't have to thank me, Maya. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to go through that." They left the park in silence, her father's arm protectively around her. The world outside the car blurred past, but Maya's mind was still with the terror she'd felt only moments before. For the first time, she understood a painful truth. Not everyone who wore a badge was like her father. Not everyone could be trusted. The weight of justice. The ride home was silent. Elijah kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other gently resting on his daughter's shoulder, hoping to steady her trembling. His gaze remained fixed ahead, but every so often, he'd steal a glance at Maya. She stared out the window, her face pale, her fingers clutching the strap of her backpack so tightly that her knuckles were white. He wanted to say something, to offer words of comfort, but he couldn't find any that felt right. Anger and guilt knotted within him, robbing him of the composure he was known for on the force. As they pulled into the driveway, Maya's mother, Lillian, was already waiting, worry etched deep into her features. She had sensed something was wrong the moment Elijah called, his voice tight, urging her to be at the door when they arrived. Now, seeing Maya's haunted expression, she didn't hesitate. She rushed forward, gathering her daughter into her arms, brushing her hair back and whispering soothing words as Maya buried her face in her mother's shoulder. "What happened?" Lillian asked softly, looking over Maya's head to her husband. Elijah's eyes, usually calm and steady, were shadowed with a tension she'd rarely seen. "Let's talk inside," he replied, guiding them both toward the house. Once they were inside, Lillian led Maya to the living room, where they sat together on the couch. Elijah paced by the window, one hand pressed to his forehead as he struggled to find the words to explain what had happened. He knew he needed to be careful, to avoid pushing Maya too far too soon. But he also knew she couldn't carry this alone, and neither could he. Finally, he took a deep breath and sat down across from them. Maya, he began gently, I know today was more than you should have had to deal with. I want you to know that what happened wasn't your fault. Nothing about it was okay. And it's my job to make sure it never happens again. Maya lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed and full of confusion. Dad, why would he do that? He's a cop. He's supposed to help people, not hurt them. Elijah's heart broke a little at her question, her voice barely above a whisper. He searched for an answer that could make sense, but the reality was harsh and unforgiving. Maya, sometimes people use their power in the wrong way. It doesn't make it right, and it doesn't excuse what he did. But I want you to know that he will face the consequences. I won't let him get away with this. Lillian tightened her hold on Maya's hand, her own anger simmering beneath a veneer of calm. We're here for you, sweetheart, she murmured, stroking Maya's hair. You don't have to go through this alone. Your dad and I will make sure of that. Maya nodded, though the lines of confusion and fear lingered on her face. She still felt the ghostly pressure of Tate's hand on her wrist, the chill of the bottle pressed against her lips. She wanted to shake off the memory, but it clung to her, suffocating. What's going to happen to him? She asked quietly, glancing up at her father. Elijah's face hardened. He'll be suspended for now, but I'm pushing for more than that. This isn't something I can overlook. I've already called the precinct. They know what he did, and I'll make sure there's a formal investigation. This is only the beginning. But even as he said the words, Elijah knew it wouldn't be easy. Officer Nolan Tate had connections within the department, friends who were likely to defend him, especially those who shared his more brash, unchecked approach to policing. There was an unspoken code among certain officers, one that bred a toxic loyalty, protecting each other even when it meant turning a blind eye to misconduct. Elijah was painfully aware of how deep this code ran, but he had made up his mind. He would not let it silence him. That night, Elijah found himself pacing in his study long after everyone had gone to bed. He was replaying the events over and over, grappling with the guilt that gnawed at him. Tate had been one of his officers, a man he was supposed to lead and supervise. How had he missed the warning signs? Had he been so consumed with his duties that he had overlooked the danger right under his nose? Lost in thought, he hardly noticed when Lillian appeared in the doorway. She stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. Elijah, she said gently, placing a hand on his arm. You need to rest. I can't, he replied, his voice barely a whisper. I should have protected her. I let that man stay in my department. I let him near my daughter. Lillian's eyes softened with empathy. You didn't know, Elijah. None of us did. But now that you do, you're doing the right thing. He sank into the chair, rubbing his hands over his face. Lillian, I feel like I failed her. My own daughter was in danger, and I was blind to it. She trusted me to keep her safe. You're still protecting her, Lillian assured him. By holding him accountable, by standing up for her. That's more than a lot of people would do. You're showing her that she can trust you, even if it means facing some hard truths. He looked at her, grateful for her unwavering support. I just wish she didn't have to carry this with her. She's only 13. She should be worrying about school, friends, not wondering why someone she thought she could trust betrayed her. They sat in silence, the weight of the day settling heavily between them. Finally, Elijah stood, determination sharpening his features. I'm going to file a report first thing in the morning, make it as public as possible. The department needs to know that this can't be swept under the rug. Lillian nodded. Do what you need to do, Elijah. We'll get through this together. The next day, Elijah took Maya to school himself, insisting on walking her to the entrance. He noticed the way she clung a bit tighter to his hand, the shadows beneath her eyes betraying the sleepless night she'd endured. She tried to smile for him, but he could see the lingering fear behind it. Remember, if you need anything, I'm just a phone call away, he told her gently. And don't be afraid to talk to someone if you feel overwhelmed. There are people here who can help you. Maya nodded, her voice small as she replied, "Thanks, Dad." He watched her walk into the school, each step a reminder of the resilience she was already beginning to show. She was stronger than he'd realized, but the knowledge brought him little comfort. He didn't want her to have to be strong because of something like this. At the precinct, Elijah's arrival was met with curious glances and a palpable tension. Word had already spread about the incident, and he could feel the judgment in the air, the whispers that buzzed just below the surface. But he held his head high, determined not to let the undercurrents shake his resolve. He approached his supervisor, Lieutenant Garcia, who was waiting in his office, a serious expression on his face. "Elijah," he began, motioning for him to take a seat, "I've read your preliminary report on Officer Tate. Are you absolutely certain about this?" Elijah's jaw tightened. "Lieutenant, I was there. He harassed my daughter, tried to intimidate her, and worse. There's no excuse for his behavior." Garcia sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You know this is going to stir things up, right? Tate has allies here, people who won't be happy about this coming out." "I'm aware," Elijah replied calmly, meeting Garcia's gaze with unwavering resolve. "But my duty is to the truth and to my daughter. I'm not backing down." The lieutenant nodded slowly. "All right, I'll authorize the internal investigation, but you should be prepared for pushback. People will question your motives, even accuse you of being biased." "Let them," Elijah said firmly. "This is bigger than me, bigger than my career. My daughter's safety and the integrity of this department are at stake." As he left the office, Elijah felt the weight of the coming battle settle on his shoulders. He knew that challenging the status quo would be a struggle, that exposing Tate's actions would draw out hidden loyalties and reveal uncomfortable truths. But he was ready for it. His love for Maya, his determination to see justice served, fueled his every step. He made his way back to his desk, pulling up the necessary forms to document the incident officially. It would be a long road, one fraught with resistance, but he wouldn't stop until he'd done everything in his power to protect his daughter, and to make sure no other child would face what she had endured. A line drawn. The days following the incident passed in a tense haze, marked by silent stares, whispered conversations, and cautious glances at the police precinct. Elijah felt the weight of it every time he walked through the halls. He was no longer just a captain or a respected figure within the department. He had become a lightning rod, someone who had dared to disrupt the carefully maintained equilibrium. As he walked to his office, he noticed how officers who used to greet him warmly now averted their eyes, their conversations halting as he passed. His report on Officer Tate had not only initiated an internal investigation, but also triggered a level of scrutiny that threatened to unearth uncomfortable truths some would rather keep buried. When he reached his desk, he found a stack of paperwork waiting for him, more than usual, as if an unspoken message was being sent through the overload. The top of the stack bore a message scrawled in faint ink. "Let it go, Elijah." The words were written with a familiarity that chilled him. He'd seen this kind of warning before, often used to intimidate officers into silence, into accepting the injustices hidden beneath the department's polished image. He clenched his jaw, steeling himself. He wouldn't let this message deter him. Tate's actions would not be swept under the rug. His phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Lieutenant Garcia, his voice tense. "Elijah, come to my office." Elijah took a deep breath and made his way down the hall. When he entered Garcia's office, he was met not only by Garcia, but by several other high-ranking officers, all of whom looked at him with varying degrees of skepticism. Some he recognized as friends. Others had always kept their distance, favoring Tate's brand of enforcement over his own. Garcia motioned for him to sit. "Elijah, we've reviewed your report, and well, some of us have concerns about how this will impact the department's image." Elijah's expression darkened. "This isn't about image, Lieutenant. It's about the safety of our community, of our children." One of the other officers, Captain Ridgway, crossed his arms, leaning back with a sigh. "With all due respect, Elijah, what Tate did was out of line, But going public with this is going to cause a backlash. People don't like to see officers turning on their own. I'm not turning on anyone. Elijah shot back, keeping his tone measured. I'm doing my job, the same job I was entrusted with when I took my oath. If we start excusing behavior like Tate's, where does it end? Ridgway gave a slow shake of his head. You're going to isolate yourself. You know that, right? This kind of thing, it sticks with you. You'll have officers questioning your loyalty. Elijah met his gaze, unflinching. If loyalty means ignoring abuse of power, then I'm proud to be disloyal. Garcia cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. Let's take a step back. Elijah, no one's saying you're wrong, but we're facing enough scrutiny as it is. We need to tread carefully. Elijah leaned forward, a steely resolve in his eyes. This isn't something we can afford to ignore. If we look the other way, we're no better than Tate. There was a tense silence before Garcia spoke again. His tone softened. You're putting your career on the line, Elijah. I just want you to understand that. I understand perfectly, Elijah replied, standing. My daughter's safety, and the safety of every other child, matters more to me than my career. He left the office, feeling a mixture of frustration and clarity. If standing up for what was right meant losing friends, losing respect, then so be it. He would fight this battle alone if he had to. Meanwhile, at school, Maya was finding it hard to focus. Every class felt like a blur, the lessons barely sinking in as her mind drifted back to that afternoon in the park. She felt change, as though a layer of innocence had been peeled away, revealing a harsh reality she hadn't been prepared for. During lunch, her best friend, Leela, noticed her unusual silence. Maya, are you okay? You've been different. You don't laugh as much anymore. Did something happen? Maya hesitated, unsure how much she could share. Part of her wanted to tell Leela everything, to release the weight she carried, but another part feared the questions it might raise. She didn't want to relive the horror of that day. It's just, things are complicated right now, she said finally, forcing a weak smile. Family stuff. Leela nodded slowly. I get it, but you know you can talk to me, right? Maya nodded, grateful for Layla's kindness. Still, even as her friend's words offered a brief comfort, the unease lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that everyone around her was oblivious to the darker side of the world, a side she had only glimpsed but couldn't forget. That evening, as she sat at the dinner table with her parents, Maya couldn't help but notice how tired her father looked. Lines creased his forehead, and his shoulders sagged with a weariness she hadn't seen before. He was her hero, a man of strength and integrity. But now she sensed something more fragile beneath the surface. Dad, she ventured, her voice barely more than a whisper. Are you okay? Elijah looked up, managing a small, reassuring smile. I'm fine, Maya. Just a little tired. Work's been demanding. She nodded, sensing that he was trying to protect her, to keep the full truth hidden. But she wasn't a child anymore, not after what she'd experienced. Is it because of what happened? Elijah exchanged a glance with Lillian, who gave him a gentle nod of encouragement. He took a deep breath, reaching across the table to take Maya's hand. Yes, sweetheart, what happened has caused a lot of tension at work. But it's important, and I need you to know that you're worth every struggle I face. No matter how hard it gets, I'm doing this for you. Maya's chest tightened, a swell of gratitude and guilt mixing together. I don't want you to get hurt, Dad. I don't want this to be my fault. Elijah squeezed her hand, his gaze soft but resolute. Maya, this is not your fault. None of this. Tate made his own choices, and now he's going to face the consequences. I promise you, this fight is mine to carry. You just focus on being you. Lillian reached over, placing her hand on Maya's other hand. We're a family, Maya. We stand together. For the first time in days, Maya felt a sense of peace, a reassurance that her father's strength would carry them through. But as she looked into his weary eyes, she knew that the fight was far from over. The next morning, as Elijah arrived at the precinct, he found a surprising face waiting for him outside his office. Detective Amelia Shaw, one of the few people he'd come to trust in the department. She was known for her tenacity, her unwillingness to compromise her morals, and her fierce independence. "Elijah," she greeted him, her voice low. "Mind if we talk?" He nodded, leading her into his office. Once inside, she closed the door and took a seat, her expression serious. "I heard about the investigation," she said, her tone careful, "and I know you're facing pressure to drop it." Elijah sighed. "More than you can imagine. Some of the officers have made it clear that they'd rather I keep quiet." Amelia leaned forward, her eyes steady. "Elijah, I want you to know that you're not alone in this. There are people here who support you, even if they're afraid to speak up. And I'm one of them. If you need backup, if you need someone to stand by you, I'm here." A surge of gratitude filled him. "Thank you, Amelia. It means more than you know." She gave a firm nod. "We can't let this go, Elijah. We've seen too much go unpunished." Tate crossed a line. "And if we let him walk away without consequences, we're setting a dangerous precedent. People need to know that we stand for justice, not just for ourselves but for the community." He felt a renewed sense of determination. "You're right. Together, we can push this forward. We can show them that justice matters more than loyalty to a badge." As she left his office, Elijah felt a sense of solidarity he hadn't expected. He wasn't entirely alone in this fight, and with allies like Amelia, he knew that change was possible, even if it came at a cost. But as the day wore on, Elijah received word of another challenge. Tate had filed a complaint, alleging harassment and claiming that Elijah was pursuing a vendetta against him. It was a bold move, one clearly aimed at shifting the blame and casting Elijah as the villain. The complaint brought fresh scrutiny, new obstacles, but Elijah wasn't deterred. He would fight back, knowing that the truth was on his side. As he prepared his response, he thought of Maya, of the promise he'd made to protect her. This fight was far from over, but for her, and for every other child, he would see it through, no matter what. The breaking point. The following days were marked by tension and quiet defiance, with Elijah facing mounting pressure from both inside and outside the department. The complaint Tate filed had circulated through the precinct like wildfire, becoming the topic of whispered conversations and passing glances. Officers he'd worked with for years now looked at him with skepticism, questioning his motives and his loyalty. The weight of it was exhausting, but his resolve remained unbroken. He knew the fight wouldn't be easy, but he was prepared to go the distance, whatever the cost. Elijah had been called into a preliminary hearing with the Internal Affairs Board, a closed-door session where Tate's accusations were reviewed alongside Elijah's report. The board had a way of twisting intentions, of making a victim look like an aggressor, and Elijah was painfully aware of how carefully he would need to navigate their questions. The night before the hearing, Elijah sat alone at the kitchen table, his case files spread in front of him. Every detail of Tate's behavior, every warning sign, every complaint that had gone ignored. It was all there, documented in black and white. He felt the quiet rage building within him, a frustration that was mirrored by a sense of responsibility. As he sifted through the files, he heard footsteps approach and looked up to see Maya standing in the doorway, her face shadowed with worry. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, offering her a reassuring smile. "You should be in bed. It's a school night." "I know," she murmured, shifting nervously, "but I couldn't sleep." Elijah's expression softened as he motioned for her to sit beside him. She took the seat, glancing at the papers in front of him, her eyes lingering on the familiar police insignia. "Is all that about Officer Tate?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elijah nodded, choosing his words carefully. "Yes. Tomorrow, I have to meet with some people who'll look over everything and decide what to do next. It's a lot to go through." Maya looked down, fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. Dad, do you think they'll believe you? The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He hadn't wanted her to worry about the outcome, but he couldn't deny the doubts that had crossed his mind. I don't know, Maya. Sometimes people don't want to see the truth, even when it's right in front of them. But I'm not giving up. She nodded, her gaze still fixed on the papers. Can I come with you? Elijah paused, caught off guard. Why would you want to do that? She shrugged, her voice barely audible. Because it's about me too, right? I want to help. He reached over, placing a hand on hers. Maya, you don't have to do that. This is my responsibility, not yours. You've already been through enough. But Dad, I want to show them that it's true, she insisted, her voice trembling with conviction. Maybe if they hear it from me, they'll understand. Elijah felt a surge of pride and sadness. She was only 13, yet here she was, willing to face her fears to help him. He squeezed her hand gently. Maya, you're incredibly brave, but I don't want you to feel pressured to do something that makes you uncomfortable. She looked up at him, her eyes steady. I'm scared, but I know you're doing this to protect me. I don't want you to be alone in this. Please, let me come with you. Elijah took a deep breath, considering her words. Finally, he nodded. All right. If you're sure, then I'll make arrangements for you to join me. The relief in her eyes was immediate, and she managed a small, grateful smile. Elijah felt a surge of determination, bolstered by her support. They were in this together, and he wouldn't let her down. The next morning, they arrived at the precinct together, drawing curious stares from officers as they walked through the hallways. Elijah kept a protective hand on Maya's shoulder, his expression unwavering as they made their way to the Internal Affairs office. He could feel her tension, the slight trembling of her shoulders, but she kept her head high, mirroring his resolve. The board members, 2 men and 1 woman, sat at a long table, their faces expressionless as Elijah and Maya took their seats across from them. Officer Tate was also present, sitting smugly with a slight smirk, his confidence unsettlingly intact. The sight of him made Elijah's stomach turn, but he focused on Maya, drawing strength from her presence. The lead investigator, a man named Sergeant Donovan, cleared his throat and began. Captain Collins, thank you for your attendance today. As you know, we're here to assess the validity of your complaint against Officer Nolan Tate, as well as his counterclaim that this investigation is a personal vendetta. We understand that your daughter, Maya, was involved in the incident, and she's here to provide her perspective as well. Maya shifted in her seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Elijah gave her a reassuring nod before addressing Donovan. That's correct. Maya is here because she wants to share what happened in her own words. Donovan leaned forward, his gaze scrutinizing. Maya, thank you for being here. We understand this might be difficult, but we just need to hear your side of things. Maya took a shaky breath, gathering her courage. I was looking for my dad at the park, she began, her voice steady despite the anxiety in her eyes. But I saw Officer Tate instead. I thought he was there to help, but he started saying strange things to me. He told me that I thought I was special because of my dad. And then, he tried to make me drink something. A murmur went through the room, but Maya pressed on, her voice growing firmer. When I said no, he got angry and grabbed my wrist. He tried to make me drink it, and I was scared. I didn't know what to do. Elijah reached over, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. She looked up at him, drawing strength from his support, and continued. Then my dad showed up, and Officer Tate let go of me. I was so relieved, but I just don't understand why he did it. The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. Donovan exchanged a glance with the other board members, his expression unreadable. Thank you, Maya, he said finally, his tone softer. That was very brave of you to share. Tate leaned forward, his voice dripping with feigned regret. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I never intended to harm the girl. I was simply trying to have a little fun, a harmless joke. Kids need to be toughened up a bit, don't they? Elijah's jaw clenched, and he felt Maya's grip on his hand tighten. He looked directly at Donovan, his voice controlled but filled with barely restrained fury. With all due respect, Sergeant, that's not how you treat a child. This wasn't a joke. It was harassment, plain and simple. Donovan nodded, his expression thoughtful. Captain Collins, I understand your concerns, and I want to assure you that we are taking this seriously. However, there's one more thing I need to ask. Elijah braced himself. Go ahead. Are you prepared for the potential backlash of pushing this investigation forward? Donovan asked, his tone grave. Your career, your relationships within the department, they may never be the same. Elijah looked at Maya, his heart swelling with pride at the courage she'd shown. He turned back to Donovan, his voice steady. If protecting my daughter and standing up for what's right costs me my career, then so be it. I'd rather leave this department with my integrity intact than stay and let this go unanswered. There was a beat of silence, and Donovan nodded slowly, respect flashing in his eyes. Very well. We will proceed with the investigation. Officer Tate will be suspended pending further review. Tate's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear. Wait, you can't. This is all being blown out of proportion. Donovan cut him off with a curt gesture. Officer Tate, this board takes allegations of misconduct very seriously. You'll have your chance to defend yourself. But for now, you're suspended. Relief flooded Elijah, and he felt Maya's grip relax in his hand. The fight was far from over, but this was a victory, however small. He stood, guiding Maya out of the room as Tate was escorted in the opposite direction. Outside the room, Elijah knelt down to face Maya, his gaze filled with pride. You did something incredibly brave today, Maya, he said softly. I couldn't be prouder of you. She managed a small smile, the tension finally easing from her shoulders. I just wanted them to know the truth, Dad. I wanted them to see you were doing the right thing. He hugged her tightly, his heart swelling with gratitude and love. Thank you for being there with me. I don't know if I could have done it without you. As they walked out of the precinct together, Elijah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight wasn't over, but he knew, with Maya by his side, he had the strength to see it through. And for the first time since the ordeal began, he believed that justice was within reach, not just for Maya, but for every person who'd ever been wronged by those sworn to protect them. Lines in the sand. The suspension of Officer Tate rippled through the precinct like an earthquake. Elijah could feel the tremors in the wary glances from his fellow officers, the way conversations hushed as he passed, and the unmistakable tension in the air. Each day seemed to bring new obstacles, a quiet but unmistakable resistance from those who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with him. But Elijah held his head high, committed to seeing this through, knowing he was fighting for something far greater than his reputation. One afternoon, as he made his way to his office, he noticed a group of officers gathered by the coffee station. Their voices were low, but their eyes shifted toward him as he approached. Among them was Officer Duncan, a burly man with a reputation for cutting corners, someone who had never seen eye to eye with Elijah's high standards. Elijah, Duncan greeted him, his tone carrying a hint of disdain. So how does it feel, turning on one of your own? Guess loyalty doesn't mean much to you. Elijah stopped, holding Duncan's gaze with a steady calm. Loyalty to the badge doesn't mean excusing misconduct. It means upholding the law, no matter who breaks it. Duncan scoffed, shaking his head. You're taking this too far. A little roughness, a bit of discipline. It's all part of the job. Tate didn't do anything worth ruining his career over. Elijah felt a surge of anger, but kept his voice even. Discipline. He harassed my daughter. There's a line, Duncan, and Tate crossed it. A few of the other officers shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Elijah and Duncan. Duncan's face twisted into a sneer. The only line that got crossed is yours, Collins. You're making us look weak. If you keep this up, don't expect us to have your back when things get rough. Elijah felt the weight of Duncan's words, the quiet threat hanging in the air, but he refused to back down. "I'll live with the consequences, Duncan. If upholding justice means standing alone, then so be it." He turned and walked away, the tense silence following him down the hallway. As he reached his office, he closed the door and let out a long breath. The division within the department was deepening, and he could feel the lines being drawn around him. This wasn't just about Tate anymore. It was about challenging a culture that had tolerated too much for too long. At home, Maya could sense the strain her father was under. He tried to hide it, putting on a brave face for her and Lillian, but she noticed the way his shoulders sagged when he thought no one was watching, the shadows under his eyes deepening with each passing day. One evening after dinner, she found him sitting alone in the living room, his gaze distant as he stared at the framed photograph of their family on the wall. She hesitated before approaching, then gently placed her hand on his arm. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked softly. Elijah looked down at her, his face softening. "I'm all right, Maya. Just tired. Because of the investigation." He nodded, trying to smile. "It's been tough, but I'm doing this for you. For us. I want you to know that you're safe, that you can trust the people who are supposed to protect you." She looked away, biting her lip. "Do you think they'll ever forgive you? The other officers, I mean." Elijah sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Honestly, I don't know. Some people don't like change, Maya. They see it as a threat. But this is a fight worth having, even if it costs me some friendships." Maya's eyes filled with admiration, but also with worry. "I'm proud of you, Dad, but I don't want you to lose everything just because of me." He pulled her into a hug, holding her close. "Maya, this isn't just about you. It's about doing the right thing. And if I lose a few friends along the way, then maybe they weren't the kind of friends worth having." She rested her head on his shoulder, her heart heavy with a mix of pride and fear. She wished she could shoulder some of the burden he carried, but she knew that this fight was one he had chosen, not out of obligation but out of love and principle. A few days later, as Elijah prepared for another meeting with Internal Affairs, he received an unexpected call. It was Amelia Shaw, the detective who had quietly supported him since the beginning. Her voice was tense, the urgency unmistakable. "Elijah, we need to talk. Can you meet me at Wilson's Cafe after your meeting?" "Of course. Is everything all right?" There was a pause on the line. "I don't know yet, but I think you need to see something." The cryptic message lingered in his mind as he headed to the precinct. The meeting with Internal Affairs was a grueling one, filled with pointed questions and attempts to twist his words, but he held his ground, providing every piece of evidence he'd gathered against Tate and defending his actions with quiet conviction. By the time he left, exhaustion had settled into his bones, but he made his way to the cafe, where Amelia was waiting at a corner table, a thick folder in front of her. She motioned for him to sit, her expression unreadable. "I did some digging," she began quietly, "and I found something disturbing." She slid the folder across the table, her gaze intense. "Elijah, Tate has a history that's been buried and ignored. This isn't the first time he's been accused of misconduct." Elijah's heart sank as he opened the folder, skimming through the reports inside. Each one detailed instances of abuse, harassment, and intimidation, complaints filed by civilians, many of them young or vulnerable. And each complaint had been dismissed, marked as resolved, with no further action taken. This is appalling," he muttered, his hands trembling with anger. "How did this stay hidden?" Amelia leaned forward, her voice low. "He's had people covering for him, officers willing to overlook his behavior because he's one of them. They've buried complaints, intimidated victims into silence. And now, they're trying to do the same to you." Elijah's stomach turned as he realized the extent of the cover-up. Tate wasn't just an isolated case. He was part of a larger issue, a network of officers who had enabled and protected him. The resistance he faced wasn't just about loyalty to a friend. It was about protecting a system that had allowed Tate to continue unchecked for years. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We bring this to light," Amelia replied firmly. "It's risky, but the truth needs to come out. People need to know that this isn't just about one officer. It's about a culture that's failed its duty to protect." Elijah felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination that cut through his fatigue. "I'll do it. Whatever it takes, I'll stand up against this." That evening, Elijah sat down with Lillian and Maya, explaining what he'd learned, the gravity of the situation finally hitting home. "So it's not just about Tate?" Maya asked, her voice barely audible. "There are others like him." Elijah nodded solemnly. "Yes, and there are people who have let it continue. This fight, it's bigger than I thought." Lillian reached out, taking his hand. "We're with you, Elijah. No matter how hard this gets, we'll stand by you." Maya looked at him, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. "I know you'll make this right, Dad. Just promise you'll stay safe." He pulled her into a hug, whispering softly, "I promise, Maya. I'll be careful. But I can't back down now." In the days that followed, Elijah and Amelia worked together, gathering every piece of evidence they could find, reaching out to civilians who had been silenced, some of whom were finally willing to share their stories. Each testimony, each record, was a piece of a puzzle that painted a disturbing picture of the department's failure to protect its community. The backlash grew, with officers loyal to Tate growing more vocal in their disdain, whispering accusations of betrayal and threats of isolation. Some even suggested Elijah should leave the department altogether, but he remained steadfast, buoyed by the support of his family and the growing realization that he was not alone. One evening, as he walked to his car after another grueling day, he found a note tucked under the windshield wiper. It was written in hurried, almost frantic handwriting. "Watch your back. Some things are better left buried." Elijah crumpled the note, feeling the surge of anger, but also a sense of validation. They were scared of the truth he was bringing to light, and that fear only strengthened his resolve. As he drove home, he thought of Maya, of the promise he'd made to her, and of the legacy he wanted to leave behind. This was his chance to show her, to show everyone, that justice was worth fighting for, no matter the cost, and he would see it through to the end. A stand for justice, a stand for justice. The tension in the precinct was thick enough to cut with a knife. Elijah could feel the weight of every stare, every murmured conversation as he walked through the hallways. The internal affairs investigation was nearing its final stages, and the stakes had never been higher. For weeks, he and Detective Amelia Shaw had worked tirelessly, gathering testimony from former victims of Tate and piecing together a story of corruption and complicity within the department. But now, the real test was about to begin, and Elijah knew that he stood on the precipice of a decision that would define his life. The meeting that day was with the top brass, the police chief, 2 senior officials from internal affairs, and a select group of precinct leaders. As Elijah stepped into the conference room, he saw that Tate was already seated, flanked by a few loyal officers, including Officer Duncan, whose face was stony and unyielding. The police chief, an older man with a grave expression, motioned for Elijah to take a seat. "Captain Collins," he began, his voice measured. "This has been a complicated and troubling investigation, one that has raised many difficult questions about our department's conduct. Today, we're here to determine the next steps and decide if Officer Tate will face formal charges." Elijah nodded, his face impassive. "Thank you, Chief. I appreciate the chance to be here, to ensure the truth is brought to light." But as he spoke, Tate leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're really something, Collins. I don't know how you sleep at night, throwing one of your own under the bus just to make a name for yourself." Elijah met his gaze calmly. "This isn't about my reputation, Tate. It's about accountability, something we owe to the community we serve. You crossed a line, And you know it." Tate scoffed, his smirk faltering as he turned to the police chief. "Chief, you know me. You know I've done nothing but good work for this department. Collins here is out to get me, and now he's trying to drag all of us down with him." The chief held up a hand, signaling for silence. He looked at Elijah, his gaze unreadable. "Captain Collins, are you certain that your actions have been entirely free of personal vendettas?" Elijah took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Absolutely, Chief. I have no vendetta. I'm here because my daughter, an innocent 13-year-old girl, was harassed by an officer who abused his position. And as I looked deeper, I discovered that she wasn't his only victim. Tate has been protected by a network of officers who have systematically buried complaints and silenced those who dared to speak out. This isn't just about my daughter. It's about restoring trust in this department." A heavy silence settled over the room. Amelia, who was seated beside Elijah, broke the quiet, her voice calm but firm. "If I may, Chief, I've corroborated Elijah's findings. We've spoken to multiple victims, all of whom have recounted similar experiences. Their complaints were dismissed or simply disappeared from the records. This goes beyond Officer Tate. This is a failure of oversight and a betrayal of the values we claim to uphold." The chief's face hardened as he listened, his gaze flickering from Amelia to Tate, then back to Elijah. "This is a serious accusation, one that implicates not only Officer Tate but other members of this department. Are you both willing to stand by this claim?" Elijah nodded without hesitation. "Yes, Chief. If we don't hold ourselves accountable, then we are failing the community we swore to protect. This isn't about loyalty to a badge. It's about loyalty to the principles that badge represents." The chief glanced at Tate, who was visibly shaken, his bravado crumbling under the weight of the evidence piling against him. "Officer Tate, given the gravity of these accusations and the mounting evidence, I have no choice but to place you under suspension pending further investigation." A flash of panic crossed Tate's face. "Chief, please. This is a mistake. I didn't do anything wrong." But the chief's decision was final. He gestured to two officers, who stepped forward to escort Tate out of the room. As Tate was led away, he turned back to Elijah, his voice filled with bitterness. "You'll regret this, Collins. You'll be left with nothing." Elijah met his glare with quiet resolve. "I'd rather lose everything than compromise my integrity." As Tate disappeared down the hallway, Elijah felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. The battle was far from over, but the first victory was theirs. He turned to Amelia, who offered him a supportive nod, a silent acknowledgement of the courage it had taken to get this far. At home that evening, Elijah was greeted by Maya, who had been anxiously waiting for news. She rushed to him as he stepped through the door, her eyes wide with concern. "Dad, how did it go?" she asked, her voice trembling. Elijah knelt down to her level, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's over, sweetheart. Officer Tate has been suspended, and the department is finally taking action." A look of relief washed over her face, but she still seemed troubled. "Does that mean it's really over? No one else is going to come after us?" Elijah sighed, pulling her into a hug. "I can't promise there won't be more challenges, Maya. But I can promise that I'll protect you, no matter what. I'll make sure the truth is known, even if it means facing some tough times." Maya nodded, leaning into his embrace. "I'm proud of you, Dad, and I'm glad I could help." He held her close, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for her strength. She had shown a resilience beyond her years, and he knew that her courage had been a guiding force for him in this battle. As they sat together, Lillian joined them, wrapping her arms around both of them. "We've been through a lot," she murmured, her voice filled with quiet strength. "But we're stronger for it. This is our family, and we stand together." In the weeks that followed, the investigation into Tate's misconduct and the precinct's culture of complicity intensified. More victims came forward, bolstered by the courage Elijah and Maya had shown. The media caught wind of the story, and soon, Elijah found himself at the center of a public reckoning within the department. Some officers rallied behind him, seeing the importance of restoring trust, while others continued to resist, clinging to the old ways. The cost of Elijah's stand was high. Relationships with longtime friends and colleagues were strained, and he was warned that his future with the department was uncertain. But he pressed on, buoyed by the support of his family and the knowledge that he had done the right thing. One evening, as he was leaving the precinct, he noticed a familiar figure waiting for him outside. It was Officer Duncan, the man who had once threatened to turn his back on Elijah. But now, there was no malice in his expression, only a quiet respect. "Elijah," Duncan said, his voice hesitant. "I wanted to say I was wrong. I thought you were tearing us apart, but now I see you were trying to bring us back together. It took a lot of guts to do what you did. I just wanted to thank you for opening my eyes." Elijah nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. "Thank you, Duncan. It's never too late to do the right thing. We all have a responsibility to make things better." As he walked away, he felt the weight on his shoulders lift slightly. The fight had been long and hard, but the change was beginning to take root, and he knew that, in the end, it had been worth every sacrifice. Later that night, Elijah sat with Maya in the living room, watching the flickering firelight as it cast warm shadows across the room. She rested her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, feeling a deep sense of contentment and pride. "You know," he said softly, "you showed me what real courage looks like, Maya. I might have started this fight, but you're the one who gave me the strength to keep going." Maya looked up at him, her eyes shining with admiration. "I'm just glad I could help, Dad. I wanted to be brave, like you." He smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You're braver than I could ever be. And as long as I have you and your mom by my side, I know we can face anything." They sat together in peaceful silence, the battles they had fought drawing them closer, their family stronger than ever before. In the face of adversity, they had found resilience, and in their pursuit of justice, they had found each other. And as they looked ahead, they knew that whatever challenges lay in the future, they would face them together, bound by an unbreakable bond of love, courage, and integrity.